This is part 3 of our video on parallel and perpendicular lines. So our question here says, state the slope of each line, the slope of a parallel line, and the slope of a perpendicular line. So for each of these equations, we want to identify what their slope is, what their slope would be if it was parallel, and then what their slope would be if it was perpendicular. So I'm going to start by just identifying what the slope of each line is. So the slope in the equation should be the number that's in front of the x. So that means for this first one, it should be the 2. For our second one, there's the x. It should be negative 1/3. Didn't show up very well. Maybe I'll write it over here. Okay, our next one would be 3/2. And our last one does not appear to have a number in front of x, but there is something there. There is a secret, very shy little 1 that is hiding in front of that x. Okay, so parallel slopes. So in the very first part of this lesson, we talked about lines that are parallel. Things that are parallel have the same slope. So if a parallel line, something that was parallel to this, it should have the same slope. So if the slope was 2, the slope of my new line would also be 2. If the slope of this was negative 1/3, the slope of my new line, my parallel line, would be negative 1/3. If the slope of the original line was 3/2, the slope of my parallel line would be 3/2. And if the slope of my original line was 1, the slope of my new line would also be 1. So when things are parallel, the slope is the same. So it's the same as what it's parallel to. When it's perpendicular, they are negative reciprocals. Big words. And they just mean that they're negatives, they have opposite signs, and reciprocals, the fraction is flipped over. So if I take a look at my first example here, I have a 2. That 2 is secretly a 2/1. If I were to flip that over, I would get the fraction 1/2. And then this was positive, so this one needs to be negative. So a negative reciprocal means we change the sign. So this was positive, so this one's going to be negative, and you flip it over. So this was secretly 2/1, so now it is 1/2. Let's try the next one. I had negative 1/3. If I want it to be perpendicular, this is negative, so that means this one has to be positive. You do not need to write the plus sign. I'm just trying to make a point in our note here. And then that 1/3, we flip it over, becomes 3/1. Now, 3 divided by 1 is just 3, so you could just write 3 if you wanted. Our next one, I have 3/2x. So I have 3/2. So that means this is positive 3/2. It's going to become negative. And then the 3/2 is going to flip. So we get 2/3. And then our very last one here, I had a 1. That is secretly a 1/1. This is positive, so this one needs to be negative. And then we're going to flip 1/1 over to get 1/1. Now 1 does divide evenly by 1, so you could just write negative 1 if you want. So when things have the same slope, it means it's the same. When they're parallel, they have the same slope. So we leave the slope the same. If it's perpendicular, the slope should be a negative reciprocal, which means you change the sign and you flip over the fraction. So you can join me in the next video for the next part of the lesson.